Hello, this is Taylor Elwood with Sovereign Submission, and today I am so thrilled to have Erin Alexander here with me. Erin, if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and we'll get into it.
Hi, Taylor. It's very good to finally meet you. I'm Erin Alexander, and I am a clinical sexologist. I'm also a licensed professional counselor, and I am located in San Antonio, Texas.
Oh, welcome. Glad to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to talking about the subject of female-led relationships and exploring what that looks like. Before we get into that, could you briefly tell people what a sexologist is, just in case? Because I imagine there are lots of ideas as to what people think a sexologist is, but I would rather that we get very clear on that so people actually understand what that means.
Okay, so there are layers of people that are in the educational and therapy industry. Like you have sex coaches or sex educators, and then you have the sexologists, and then the more clinical sexologists, you have sex therapists. So I'm a sexologist because I can do the coaching, like as a sex coach, I can do all of that. I'm also a licensed professional counselor with an area of specialty. So I can do assessments and so forth. And as a therapist, I can also diagnose. But I do not diagnose anything as a sexologist. I will pick up on it and do the evaluations and so forth, and then I will make a referral to a different mental health professional. So I'm kind of in between because of the multiple licenses that I have. Does that make sense?
That makes plenty of sense, and I appreciate you taking the time to clarify that so that people understand. And I want to welcome Clara. Glad to have you here. As we have people pop in this chat, I'll take a moment to briefly greet them. And if you have any questions or comments as we're going through the interview, feel free to drop those in the chat and then I'll share them. So I wanted to talk a bit about female-led relationships. You and I've been kind of commenting a bit on and off with each other's notes, which I've really appreciated and gotten
Yes.
the chance to get to know you. And I'm curious as to what your definition or experience of a female-led relationship is and what that looks like in the world.
Um, I think there's a misconception that it's, like this visual of a dominatrix and, this submissive man who's, bowing to her. It's not really that simple. It's a little bit more complex than that because it involves a lot of communication, it involves consent. It's more of the power dynamic. And really, it's not, there aren't really genders associated with it. I think it's more about being compatible and collaborative and embracing who you are, being authentic. Like if you are naturally a submissive person, then it's about embracing that. And what I'm gathering from your site is that you help men to do that, embrace that. If that is who you are, if that's who you naturally are, then that's beneficial going into a relationship. And the same thing with the female. If she is naturally an alpha, I'm using the air quotes, an alpha female, then she should embrace that. And, and you're laughing, embrace that. And then you figure out a way with, communication, like how to make that work in the relationship. And it's really a great balance.
Well, I laugh because of that term alpha. I think that whole
Right.
category
Put it in air quotes.
alpha, beta, sigma, whatever is just kind of
Right.
ridiculous. And even the
It
person
is.
who first wrote about alpha wolves, because that's where the whole terminology came from, is actually basically said that he wishes he'd never written that article. So I think
Yeah.
that's very telling in and of itself. You know, there's something that you said there, and I think this is a really important distinction to make. What I've discovered is that there is, on the one hand, there's this idea that a female-led relationship or a woman-led relationship, this is another terminology that's used,
Hmm.
is assumed to be kinky, that that the man wants to be submissive and that she's going to control every aspect of his life and all this. And for some men, that is a wet dream indeed. And that's
Hmm.
great. more power to them. But what I've also discovered is that just as with any other type of relationship, there are many nuances and differentiations, and that for some men, it's not even really about being kinky or anything along those lines. It's really just about recognizing that on a fundamental level, they feel a natural inclination toward following her lead as opposed to quote unquote taking the lead.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think a lot of times when we're explaining things to, and I'm using air quotes again, lay people, um, it's hard to for them to, for I guess it's hard for a society to conceptualize the fact. I mean, to take away the gender, because it's not really about that as a power dynamic. But we use gender language because that's really what's available to us, and it's easy to explain to the public if we use that kind of language. But we know that it's more complicated than, like you're describing a female-led relationship or a beta male. Like it almost sounds disparaging in a way, and it doesn't capture really what it is.
I agree with that. And I kind of think it actually comes down to what I call the peril of categorization. Whereas
Hmm.
there's this very real tendency, well, I need to categorize everything. So if I
Yes,
categorize this, if I say it's this or I say it's that, then it fits into neat little boxes, and I can use those neat little boxes to separate me from that person or from everything else. It doesn't actually lend to a genuine relational connection and understanding between people.
I agree. It's more performative, and that's not authenticity. And I think you brought up something a few minutes ago, Taylor. Like people think it's kink, or it's some kind of scene or something like that. And it is really the relationship. And I think all relationships have a dynamic or a style to them. And this is the same way. It is however it's negotiated between the two parties.
Well, and that negotiation is a key part. Is there conscious negotiation or is it unconscious negotiation? Something that I've observed is that when I go out in public, I'll often see one person or the other person taking the lead, and the question that I always kind of think is this something where they've come to that conclusion naturally? Is it something where there's an unconscious dynamic? And I can't know 100% for sure because I haven't talked to them and I haven't asked them, and I'm not going to go up and say, "Oh, hey, I noticed that you seem to be in the lead. Is that how it normally works in the relationship?" Because that's probably going to end up creating some very awkward conversations, to say the least. But I think the main difference is that if there is this conscious awareness, the conscious conversation and the commitment to have the conversation, that it creates a lot more harmony in the relationship as opposed to one where each person finds themselves in a role and they're kind of, well, do I really even want to be in this role?
Exactly. And you're bringing up a good point about roles. So is it authentic, or are you playing a part? And I've noticed that this has really been going on, longer than we think. And when you hear some of the comments like um, "happy wife, happy life," in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, is that a female-led relationship, and they just don't know that's what it is? Um, or just the some of the I can't think of any of the other comments, but that's just one that popped into my head. And really, the female-led relationship has been around for quite some time, and even throughout history. Um, but I can tell when it does exist in a relationship, but the couple has never talked about it.
Yeah, I suspect I probably can as well. I mean, it is an interesting thing.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I always remind myself, don't make assumptions. Like, just because I think I know doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Welcome,
That's true.
Margaret. Glad to have you here again. Feel free to drop any comments below if you have any comments or questions as we're going through this. The other thing that I think is really or that I find is important is that communication aspect. So what's some advice that you would give to people that are looking at the relationship and they're wanting to actually consciously negotiate and discuss this kind of dynamic and bring it into their lives with more intention and awareness than perhaps was necessarily there in the relationship beforehand?
I always suggest to people that if something interesting pops into your head, do your research on it. Go to of course, you can use AI and, get a general idea of what it is, and then join some communities where you have a safe space to ask questions. That's what I encourage people to do. And then after that, then you have like a foundation to even bring it up to a partner and say, I've been thinking about this. I did a little bit of research, and then you're kind of creating the narrative yourself on how you want to present it, and when to present it, when it will be a safe space to present that to a partner, and then presenting it as, well, this is how we could capitalize on our strengths and be more compatible in a number of ways. And yeah, put it out there like that, but already have knowledge of it when you present it, and then consider working with somebody that specializes in the area to help create what you want the agreement to look like.
Yeah, what I found is that I looked at my own life, and I realized, as I looked back through relationships, I'm like, oh, I have always pretty much 99% of the time, if not 100% of the time, found myself unconsciously in this kind of dynamic. And
Mhm.
it was really a matter of figuring out, okay, well, why am I finding myself unconsciously in this dynamic? And some of that involved doing some deep inner work and realizing like I had some inner child wounds there showing up, some other things along
Mhm.
those lines. But then after I was able to strip that away and do the work around it, then I still came back to, I still want this. And that was a very good turning point, because at that point it became a conscious choice as opposed to an unconscious pattern repetition that had been there from most of my life.
What made you most comfortable? Like when you realized, when you got to that moment and you said, I kind of like this. Like, what was the most intriguing for you?
I think the most intriguing for me was recognizing that if I chose it consciously, I was
Hmm.
actually choosing myself first and foremost, instead of choosing somebody else. So before, where I'd maybe fit into that whole happy wife, happy life thing, which was kind
Hmm.
of an unconscious abandonment of myself, I wasn't necessarily being honest with myself or with her about the choice to be for this type of relationship. And so that would end up actually creating a lot of pressure on the relationship. But when I consciously was like, oh, this is something I want. I've done the work around my mother wound. I've done the work around some of the way that this has shown up in relationship. And I'm still realizing that this is something that I want, that there is an element here of desire to it, that it gave me the opportunity to really be present with that and say, okay, if I'm choosing this, then I can actually give this to somebody, and I can give it in a way where I'm not putting those old patterns on them. And I think that that was really intriguing for me, that, okay, well, what would it be like to be in this relationship consciously, as opposed to just unconsciously acting out stuff from long ago that hadn't been resolved and needed to be resolved before I could be in a relationship successfully.
Okay. And that's a really good point too, knowing that you've done the work, because you said that a couple of times. And then you did work before you could be in a relationship successfully. Um, I don't think I hear that often enough. Maybe that's why I'm a therapist, because I don't hear people say that enough. Like, hey, I'm not really ready to be in a relationship. They're in the space of, I don't want to be alone, and then so I keep getting in relationships. But you brought up a really good point.
Well, it only took me 49 years to get here.
That's okay. That's all right. You're there. You're there.
It's just it is a really fascinating thing, though, because I mean, I do see this happen a lot, where like the reason people get into relationships or stay in relationships is I don't want to be alone. Well, what is it that you're so afraid of being alone with? For me, for a long time, it was really being alone with that person, that part of myself that was basically wanting certain things, wanting the healing, wanting other things, but it was acting it out from a place of shadow. And so when I went and I did my work around it, it did change things. And I think that this is part of what I've noticed, even like reading some of the Substack notes, other things, is that there is this deep craving that people seem to have where they want to find healing in a relationship. And the healing that they
Yeah,
actually need to do is in relationship with themselves before they actually get into something with someone else.
I agree 1000%. And one of the assignments I give people is, I want to know, would you date you? And
Mm.
almost all of the time people say, absolutely not. Like I don't even get the sentence out and they're like, oh, absolutely not. Hell no, I wouldn't date me. So, okay, well, you're creating some homework for yourself.
I love that. That's a great example. I mean, yeah, because it's like, well, okay, if you wouldn't date yourself, then why do you think anyone else would date you?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a long homework usually. Oh, and I'm a homework sexologist and therapist. I give lots of homework. Um, and that's one where it can take months to figure that out. It can take months to do a who am I assignment. And that's the whole point, like to dig into all of that stuff so you can be the best version of you when you're presenting yourself to somebody else.
So in your work with couples or with individuals, have you found that there has, when you talk with men, for example, that there's been more of a longing for being in a female led relationship, or do you find that they tend to typically revert to the usual script that so many men hear, like men must lead in relationship and all the other things that I see out there way too much?
Well, because I work a whole lot with the military, it is like that alpha, and I'm doing the air quotes again. That is the picture. You got to be a provider, you got to be the protector, and, take the lead and all of that. And what I've noticed is a lot of those guys are not like that. Like that is not naturally who they are. And I see their vulnerability when they're working with me. And I think it's fantastic, like for them to finally be able to own that, because the first thing I ask people to do, I said, okay, you have permission to be human. Okay. The uniform is gone, the work stuff, if you're CEO or whatever, that's not even part of this. Like you get to be human in this. You get to be vulnerable. And so whatever thoughts and feelings that you were having and they're all over the place, just be human. And when I say that to people, a lot of times people just break down,
Mm.
especially like somebody in the military or like somebody in some other alpha kind of role. They feel it's like safe, like they want to do that. But then it's like on the outside, they have to present this other picture.
You said a really important phrase there, which is be human.
Yes, yes.
And that's something else that I don't see a lot of. There is, again, this kind of comes back to the whole categorization thing. It's like, okay, well, we need to fit into these specific roles. And it's the roles that I think create this performative pressure around relationship.
Hmm.
I know that when I was in some of the previous relationships, I did feel a certain level of performance around how I showed up as a man, and it created a lot of pressure around being the man as opposed to being a human being and saying, well, here's what my human needs are.
Hmm. Yes. And I mean, it's good to remind people of that because you forget about it, and like I mentioned, I work with the military. So, I have to say to people like, you don't have to be a sailor today. You don't have to be an airman or a soldier or marine today. Like this is just me and you talking. You need to just be a human being, you know. Um, so yeah, I think that's And authenticity is important. And being able to acknowledge, I know that I have to put on this, I have to be in this role on the outside. I understand that. However, this is who I am authentically and who I want to present in a romantic relationship or intimate relationship.
What are some practices that you would recommend that somebody apply toward themselves to get back to being a human, regardless of whether they're in a relationship or not?
I always ask people to do some type of journaling. And it doesn't necessarily have to be handwritten journals. It can be digital journaling. It could be video journaling. So you can see what your affect is like at the beginning and then throughout and go back and look at that and see the changes in your expressions, the changes in the tone of your voice and all of that. That's a journal. Um, Songwriting, that's a way to, that's actually journaling. Artwork, sometimes people can only express themselves well if it's through art, any kind of art. And doing that, I think, is helpful. And I would put it under the category of who am I? What are the different pie charts that comprise me? Like, are you a parent? Are you an employee? You know, are you a sister or a brother? Like, what does your pie chart look like? And then that usually takes months for people to do an assignment like that, figuring out what their pie chart looks like, and then how much of it they want to change, expand, or contract.
I like that. It it's kind of all similar. It's kind of along similar lines of what I like to look at when I'm working with clients, which is that I like to look at, you know, who made you the way that you are, and what other
Hmm.
variables. Because a lot of times at least in American culture, there's this tendency to have this idea of being the rugged individual, or holding on to this notion of individuality. But I've never found that to be true. I found that if anything, there's cultural and societal markers that people play into. There's familial
Hmm.
patterns and ancestral trauma and other things that come up and shape and define that person. And learning how to step out of that and actually discover what your identity is essentially a lifelong journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you ever recommend that people do like specific trauma work, like childhood trauma work?
I do, because I think that I don't think there's a person alive that doesn't have some form of childhood trauma that they're carrying with them. Even somebody who seems to have had, like if you were to look from the outside in and say that person's childhood was ideal, I'm willing to guarantee, I'm willing to guess that there's probably something in there at some point or another, because it's impossible to not have that experience. At some point, mom and dad did something and you felt rejected or whatever, and you carried that rejection with you for the rest of your life. Like, that
Yeah,
happens. And it can be a benign reject, like it could be something seemingly benign. um I mean, in my particular case, I can easily point to the childhood trauma and stuff, because I grew up in a fairly
hmm,
chaotic environment, and I've had to do a lot of work around that. But what I find is that when I talk with people about this, that a lot of times it's when they really take a look at those unconscious patterns, that's when they start to see, for example, how those unconscious patterns show up in their sexuality. So a man, for
hmm,
example, who desires to be with a dominant woman may be actually playing out some issues that he had with his mom. And until he actually
absolutely.
strips that away and like is really able to look at it outside of the context of his sexual desire, it's going to continue to replicate and play out in his relationships, because he's trying to resolve some deep childhood trauma that he had. And sex is one of the most potent ways of doing it.
I agree, 1000%.
Doesn't
One
always
of the,
work.
I know, I know. One of the books that I recommend for people, it's the ACEs workbook. the Adverse Childhood Experience workbook. And, of course, it can be done, it's self-paced. But I really like, and they based assessments on that. Like it was research to support it. I really like it because it's not your usual, um, tell me how you feel, or like a journaling kind of workbook. It has a lot of activities. It gets you to do some mindfulness. You get to do some assessments. It kind of breaks it up a little bit. And so you don't feel, the person isn't going to feel overly exhausted, emotionally exhausted doing all of that type of work. Because I think that's a reason that people don't finish their trauma work, is because it's so exhausting. It's heavy, and I like the way that this book kind of breaks it up a little bit. So you're not always carrying a lot of emotional stuff like from week to week to week.
I'll have to look that up and put that in the show notes here as a recommendation, because yeah, I would agree with you. There's, as an ex-partner of mine once said, she was like, you can't do all the work all the time. At some point, you just have
Right.
to accept that you are who you are. I didn't fully agree with her on it, but I did understand where she was coming from in some ways, and it did help me reflect that maybe I needed to break some stuff up. So that sounds like a really good exercise. The one thing I will share too, though, is that it does get better if you stick with it at a certain point.
Yes, it does. It does. It absolutely does. And speaking of trauma, you said, well, everybody has had trauma at some point. Everybody does. If you're born, you had trauma coming out of the birth canal. Okay, so everybody has had some sort of trauma. Okay, and so I just remind people of that. Um, and then it can be pretty relative. What's traumatic for one person may not be traumatic for somebody else. And because it was a traumatic event, it doesn't mean that the person feels traumatized by it. And so there are some distinctions there to not pathologize everything. People think that therapists do that all the time, and we don't. All of us don't do that because we think it's normal, like you said, to have trauma and to go be able to process through things and not necessarily be labeled something diagnostic.
I want to welcome the Inkwell, Samantha, and Michael. And if any of you that are watching this live have any questions or comments as we're going through, feel free to drop those in. We're more than happy to answer them as we're continuing this interview.
Hi,
Yeah.
hi, you guys.
Part of it for me, and kind of coming to that recognition myself, has been also going through and doing some of this work in conjunction with like men's circles and things like that. And this is something that I try to encourage other men to do, is go into like a men's circle, because a lot of times what I've observed is that men will put the burden of the emotional labor on the romantic relationship that they're in.
Right.
And I mean, I'll share my own pet theory on this, because I've been thinking about it a lot lately, which is that I think in a lot of times the reason why they're doing it is because they're unconsciously looking to be taken care of by mom, and they don't realize that they're putting their partner into that role. And then they're putting all this pressure on the relationship itself that makes it break down, because they haven't taken the time to do the work outside of it, and to sufficiently do the work in a way where they're taking ownership of it.
I agree 1000%. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be taken care of. That can just mean I want to be nurtured, or, it can mean something like that. And so, we're not trying to make it seem like, that somebody has these terrible mommy issues, and then the woman is going to be, cleaning up after him and doing all of this stuff, for the rest of his life. But it's not like that. It's not wrong to want nurturing.
Oh
That's
no,
natural to need.
100%. It is a very normal and a healthy thing to want, and it's just a
Yes,
question of how it comes out.
absolutely.
And I mean, my own journey, and I'm not speaking for anyone else, but for my own journey, a huge part of it was learning to take care of myself, so then so that I could ask for being taken care of when it was appropriate, without at the same time putting all of that on somebody else.
Yeah. So how does that, you don't have to use your example, your life if you don't want to. Just walk me through what would that be like if you're trying to present that to a new partner.
So one thing that I've really found that has been helpful is just speaking for what I actually want without the
Hmm.
expectation that I'm going to get it from her.
Okay.
There's
Okay.
something very real and powerful about saying, I want X, but I'm not adding the entitlement in that, oh, I expect you to give it to me.
Hmm.
Simply stating it and being able to express, this is what I want, without that entitlement can actually be a very powerful and healing experience. And then being able to hear what she wants, again, with the
Yeah.
same understanding that there's not that, like, remove the entitlement piece from it. And then being open to exploring, well, how can I get this want met? Sometimes it can be met through my own capacity. Sometimes it might be met through a community. Sometimes it might be met with the person that I'm with. It could be met any number of different ways. But it's being open to that, and being able to diversify the emotional resourcing. There's something incredibly powerful for, I think, for both men and women, when it's like, oh, hey, guess what? I can actually have other people in my life. I'm not putting everything into this one relationship. I can go out and be with friends. I can go join a martial arts studio, or I can do some other activity or something along those lines and get some very real needs and wants met outside of the context of the immediate relationship I'm in, and actually come back into that relationship feeling a lot more connected and resourced to her or to him or they, or however you identify, because I've actually taken the time to take care of myself.
Perfectly said. Perfectly said. So in essence, you have to be selfish in a
You
good
know,
way.
I always say choose yourself first so that you can choose other people.
Yes. Yeah.
It
Okay.
sounds contradictory. It's an interest. It sounds contradictory, but I actually think it is, when you've really thought it out. It's not a contradiction or a paradox. It is, oh, I've learned how to choose myself, and so I can
Hmm.
consciously choose this other person, as opposed to, I'm choosing this other person in the hopes that they're going to choose me and meet my needs, which is very codependent.
I agree. And then it's you're relying on someone else's uh, actions or thoughts and feelings versus saying, this is what I want. And then this is even a form of consent. Like when you're saying, well, this is what I want, and then you're putting it out there and giving the other person the opportunity to comment on it or give feedback or consent to it. And so I'm always bringing consent into stuff. And this is an example of like the beginning parts of consent.
Yes, absolutely. And with consent comes trust.
Yes.
If I've consented, this creates the basis for building trust in the relationship, as opposed to there being a layer of non-consent there, and just this implied expectation where you're going to fulfill this need whether you want to or not.
Right. And so do you present it as a want or a need?
Well, I make a very real distinction between wants and needs, because I think it's important. A need is something that I would say is like essential toward maintaining a certain level of life. Like, I need to eat. I need to drink
Hmm.
water. I can go without food for a certain period of time, but at some point I'm gonna need to eat. I can
Hmm.
go without water for a certain period of time, but at some point I'm gonna need to take a drink of water. I need to sleep. Um, I think a want is I would like to have this. It would bring me a level of satisfaction to have it, And can I go without it? Yes, I might be uncomfortable not having it in my life, but it's not essential for me to stay alive. Now, again, there's this kind of gets a little tricky too, because at a certain point, the question then that I would almost ask in return is, well, how do we also measure the quality of life that a person has? So yes, maybe they're getting their
Right.
base needs met, but how do we also look at the quality of life? And
Mhm.
when does a want become a need because that quality of life isn't being met, and it's creating a fair amount of stress and physiological and psychological stress for this person, and actually impacting the way they live their life.
I agree. And it's pretty relative. Like your quality of life and somebody else's quality of life, that looks very different. And a want and a need is going to look very different. And like if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like if people don't even have baseline things for survival and protection and somewhere to live and all of that, it's really hard to get up there, to the middle of the triangle when you're trying to succeed at things and engage in relationships and those types of things. So it can be relative. And I always have these visuals in my head. And so when you said that, I visualized that triangle. And for all of you, for those of you who joined recently, I'm also a therapist. And so I've spent many, many years having these different visuals of psychological things in my head.
Well, and it makes sense. I mean, those visuals are very relevant toward helping to understand where somebody is and their experience. I think part of it is also getting real. Like if we look at a relationship, part of it is getting very real about, like, well, what are my needs and wants in that relationship, and how do I go about expressing them? So like in a female-led relationship, some of the things that I've seen put out there, for example, is well, like, the submissive partner's needs don't matter. I disagree with that. I mean, that person is choosing to submit. That need for submission right there clearly matters. You can't have the power dynamic without it.
Exactly.
And notwithstanding even that, it's like, well, if we only focus on one person's needs over another person's needs to the point where, like, we're saying that other person needs doesn't matter, it creates an imbalance in the actual structure and success of that relationship. At a certain point, it's just going to fall apart.
I agree.
So this is kind of where I and in your work, how do you help people, we've talked a bit about it, but how do you help people differentiate between needs and wants, and being able to express and share those with the person or people that they're involved with in a way that creates consent, and through that, hopefully, trust?
Well, that's actually an assignment that I give them, um, to distinguish. I'll hear them using the language in the session, and just kind of in my brain, I'm ticking off, okay, said need, want. Okay. So you created another assignment for yourself. I would like for you to distinguish between what your wants are and your needs. And you get to Google what the definitions of those are and apply it to right here, like what, the conversation that we're having. So then they do an assignment, and they actually enjoy doing that, because it's the first time that they've ever decided to um, do that kind of work. And if that kind of work really isn't painful, deciphering a want and a need. And I also, when I'm working with a couple, if they're doing that assignment individually, I don't want them to talk about it outside of the session. I want to see them telling each other in the session, this is what my wants are and my needs are. And that's how I usually give couple assignments.
Mm-hmm.
Don't talk about it, save it up for the session so that I can be a voyeur and see them talking to each other.
Mm. Well, and there's also something about allowing a need and a want to steep for a while. Like, it's easy to say, oh, I need or I want this. But what if I actually gave myself a little bit of time to let it steep like good tea, so that way I can really
Yeah.
taste and fully and smell and take in and savor the whole experience.
Yes. That's why it's good to have homework because they get to think about it. So
Mm-hmm.
no one escapes, no matter what question you ask me. I'm say, well, that would actually be a homework assignment. I
I've
make
gotten
sure
that. I've
that
gotten that sense just from our interview. I love it though. It's important, because it's it's really putting it back into the it's really putting it back on them
Mhm.
to empower themselves. And I think that's
Absolutely.
something we need more of in our society and culture is that self-empowerment as opposed to looking towards somebody else to provide all the answers. I think it's easy to see the folly of that particular path right now in
Mhm.
contemporary society.
I agree. 1000%. I was particularly intrigued, like when I saw you on Substack, because I had never met anybody who actually worked with or coached men who are learning to embrace um, being submissive. Like that was just very intriguing. I'm like, oh, okay, because I see like, the like maybe a dominatrix, working with men or other types of professionals, but I've never seen this before. And I said, okay, well, this is really, really interesting. And I can totally see how it would be more palatable if another guy can see that this is not a very threatening thing and it's healthy. It's very, very healthy because I think they believe it's threatening or something is being taken away from them if they're being their authentic selves.
Well, I'm very much a pioneer in this, in the sense there really isn't anybody else out there that I know of that's doing this work, like from a men's coach perspective.
Mhm.
And I've been involved in like the Mankind Project, Sacred Sons, Uncivilized, and a couple of other men's organizations. And
Mhm.
they all have their pluses and their minuses. They do some good work, and uh, they're definitely not manosphere stuff, so that's good. Um, but what I find is that there is this real gap in that there's not really a space for men who don't necessarily want to lead in relationship. The
Mhm.
majority of the message that I see is, well, men need to lead, or you need to show up and take charge, because that's the only way that she can relax and be in relationship with you. And I
Mhm.
haven't found that to be the case at all. I think that it's possible to have a very successful female-led relationship where she's quote unquote the one who's leading the relationship, and the man is taking the role of following. And there can nonetheless be a very healthy expression of masculinity through service and
Right.
devotion. And it's something that I think more men long for than is realized. But because
Mhm.
the message out there is men must lead, what do men do? They put themselves into this pressure cooker around how they need to show up in relationship. And as a result, they end up feeling pigeonholed into a patriarchal perspective of masculinity that is actually very dehumanizing for them.
I agree 1000%. And then, in on my side of things, I usually will see sexual functioning issues and performance anxiety and things like that. And it's because of all of this, because they're not able to be who they really are. And making comments like, "Well, she wears I can't let her wear the pants in the family," um, when really it could be if she's wearing the pants in the family, that is what's most healthy for the relationship.
Definitely. And in fact, it can be actually one of the healthiest realizations when it's like, oh, yeah, she's the one wearing the pants in the family, and it doesn't diminish my role in this relationship or with the family. It's just gives me a different way show up and be in that relationship and be a father if you have kids or whatnot. I don't have kids, so I can't really speak to that part of it, but I think that it's a very a very healthy expression of masculinity that is often overshadowed by all this other messaging out there. And so it's an interesting space to be in. It's as one of my mentors said to me, and he's a men's coach, but he said to me when I was talking with him about this into the session, he's like, well, he's like, you've set yourself a Herculean task. He's like, because there's really nobody out there doing this, and he's like, and it'll be really interesting to see where this goes, but he's like, I think it's really needed.
I agree with you. I can definitely attest to that it's needed, and men are saying that they need it. They're not wording it that way, but when I'm working with them, I can tell that they don't want all of that pressure. They're able to function a whole lot better if they don't have all of the pressure to provide and be the leader and um, be the alpha and all of that. I had one um, person in a session a little while back. When he was describing having to take the lead and in the household and be the provider, he was just talking and talking, and I could tell he was getting more and more anxious. And he actually took a deep breath and he put his hand on his chest.
Mm.
And that was just, I was like, oh my goodness. And then when I pointed that out to him, I said, do you realize that when you were speaking about that, being the man of the household and taking charge and all of that, you put your hand on your chest?
Mm.
And he broke down. So I get to see that part of it. So I know it's needed. I know it's needed. They're just not going to come forward and say, hey, I want to be in a female-led relationship.
Well, yeah, because it's something that society has told them is not acceptable. And so it's charting that particular course requires a certain level of just acceptance. In my part, it's been like, okay, this is a long road and I'm okay with that. And at the same time, it is, I think, one of the most healing things, because being able to say to another man that oh, hey, here's this experience, and that man can then suddenly relate and have the single most important thought that I think men need to have, which is, I am not alone.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
most men feel alone. They carry
Absolutely.
that aloneness with themselves. They don't know how to connect with other men and share the experiences that they're going through. They don't trust other men to share those experiences because they're afraid of being made fun of or mocked or all the other things that they were raised with. And what none of those men realize is that they are all carrying similar experiences and pressures. And even a man who, quote unquote, does identify and wants to be a dominant man still has still has a lot of the same stuff that he's carrying inside, where he needs to know he's not alone. So regardless of how you identify, there's still that very real component of, I am not alone, that can actually be one of the most healing experiences that I've ever seen in a men's circle or just in general.
I agree with you. I agree with you. They're walking around wearing masks all the time, whether it's, for work or, and then coming home and presenting who they believe they should be to the family. And it seems like it's emotionally exhausting having to do that and then suppressing who you really are.
It is emotionally exhausting, and it actually, in its own way, adds to the emotional exhaustion felt in the relationship in general.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Because she or he or whoever the other partner is can feel that withdrawal, and then
Mm-hmm.
they try to find some way in, or and that doesn't happen, and it creates this wall between them, and it usually leads to the 4 horsemen of relationship apocalypse.
Oh yeah.
So
that's homework too, by the way.
Yes, it is. For a very brief, very brief summation for people who are watching this, the four horsemen is it's criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling.
Yes. I'll give you a pet peeve of a therapist and a sexologist is when people have been at the stonewalling level for a year and then they come to me and say, okay, this is our last ditch effort because we're filing for divorce. And so then yeah, they bring that to the session. And so I have to be a miracle worker if they're already at the fourth level, the stonewalling. So I'm just putting that out there. Like, don't do that. Just be one of the top ones.
Well, and I think here's the interesting thing: that in a fundamental way, like for relationships to work, there at a certain point, there needs to be a shift away from focusing on like the feeling toward the values. What
Yes,
are the values that we're bringing to each other? What is going to allow me to turn towards you during tough times as well as good times? It's easy to turn to somebody during a good time. Like that first year of being in a relationship, very, very easy because you're blinded by NRE. But like when I get to know somebody, am I going to continue to turn toward them when we have a disagreement or an argument, or I have a need that I'm expressing, and that person doesn't want to meet that need, and it feels like, okay, there's no way to really negotiate that, but can we still turn toward each other and find some kind of solution that doesn't necessarily involve that person meeting that need? You get the idea. But I think that's something that our society needs to get back to. It's turning toward values and actually finding the values that bring us together, and not even just in romantic relationships, but just as a whole. Like the societal structure, as opposed to being like, okay, well, I feel this way and this person doesn't agree with me, so I'm going to automatically cut them off. Okay.
that's an assignment too, by the way. Values, that's one of the first assignments that I give people. Um, just so that on a baseline level, they can see if they match. Even if somebody's been in a relationship for 10 or 20 years, they may realize, like, oh my God, like our values don't align anymore. Like they've outgrown certain things. And so I give that to them. And then even if I'm working with somebody for like a year, periodically I will ask them to do the values assessment and then talk to each other to see what matches and what doesn't. Um, Sometimes one word, like if you're saying, well, family, that's a value of mine, it may mean very different things culturally. It may mean very different things. And so I encourage them to do that and then talk to each other about that. And that's something else I like to observe in the session, getting them to tell each other what their values are.
Mm-hmm.
So we're on the same page with these assignments. We're we're on the same page.
Well, the interesting thing that I found is that, I mean, I see a lot of people like on Substack, for example, that'll talk about female-led relationships, and they're talking about like the kinky or the sex aspect. And what I'm actually talking about is the relational aspect, because yeah, the
Mhm.
kink and the sex is important. And I mean, there certainly I'll touch on some of that. But again, what I've realized is not everybody who's in a female-led relationship wants to have kink. That may be one thing, for
Right.
first of all. But secondly, if the relational component is ignored, that excitation, that desire will eventually wither away at a certain point. You know,
I agree.
the question that I've learned to ask, both in my own relationships and really of other people, is, can we be okay together through a rough time?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have at least a friendship, like the foundation of a friendship, like trust and honesty and loyalty and respect? Like that's, yeah, you want to be able to know, does this person have my back if something bad is happening?
Exactly. And so that plays a really important role in all this.
Mhm.
So, Erin, where can people find out more about you and what you do, and learn more about your overall experiences and work in this area?
Well, of course, I'm on Substack, and you can look under my name, Erin Alexander, and it'll be under Sexologist, or Love and Intimacy by Erin, and that is my website. But I'm also on YouTube and I think Instagram. I'm not usually on there. I have a team that's on there, but I'm always on Substack because I'm, trying to learn how to do it. And I really enjoy the Substack community of writing and, the comments. Like this is a pretty good community. So that's where you can find me a lot of times on Substack.
Excellent. And what I like to ask people when I wrap up these interviews, and it's been more like we've kind of interviewed each other, but
Yes.
which I really, but
I
I've
noticed that.
appreciated that. I've appreciated that. Is what would be a final word or phrase of wisdom, other than there's homework for you to do.
Okay. Okay. I won't give anybody any homework.
Yeah.
It'll be like a takeaway.
Yeah.
Um, the takeaway is authenticity. That's just been my thing, like for the last maybe 2 years. That's so important is to be yourself, like to embrace who you really are. And I know that sounds easier said than done. It sounds like some kind of cliche, but authenticity is important.
I agree with that.
Mhm.
I'll share something here because I think it's really relevant. It was sometime earlier this week. I paused. I was going about my day, and I'm like, you know what? I'm really happy and content with myself. I'm really happy
Mhm.
and content with my life. And it was such a healing moment for me because it's like, wow, I'm happy and content. It had nothing to do with anyone I'm involved with. It had nothing to do with anything else external. It was just that deep sense of I'm happy and content with myself. Oh,
Well, I am so glad. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Taylor and I have never spoken before today.
that's true. We've exchanged notes. That's about it on
Right?
Substack.
Yeah. But we totally vibe. We get this. Okay. So yeah, I've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed this, and now I have a good referral person.
Well, thank you.
Yes, you're in my referral list now. So this has been awesome.
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming on here today, and I want to thank you again, Erin, for being here. And
My
I'll
pleasure.
see you out there in the Substack interwebs. Oh,
Yes.
we even got a comment. Neat conversation. Actually, super cool. Thank you, Michael. I'm glad. I'm glad that you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone.
All right.